different channels, different pieces of content will do different jobs at different times for different people.
I love all my measurement stuff, but creative is where the money's at.
The best creative outperforms the median by 100x.
Where the data tells a story that's gotta be told. It's the art and the science, get the numbers right.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. This one is a true doozy. You're going to hear from Tim Doyle, the CEO of Eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a digital health company with multiple brands under its umbrella, operating in Australia, the UK, Japan, and Germany. Now, why are we talking to Tim, who's a CEO there? Well, Tim's one of those unique CEOs who comes from a marketing background. So he spent a significant amount of time running growth and marketing leadership at Koala, one of Australia's leading e-commerce brands, and has also done a whole bunch of political advertising before that. I promise this is going to be one that you want to listen to. So let's dive in. All right, this is Tim Doyle from Eucalyptus. I'm going to go straight into the podcast, Tim. Welcome.
Yeah, great. Looking forward to it.
I know there's a, 16-hour time difference, so this should be like, morning time for
Mid-morning
you?
Friday? Mid-morning Friday?
All right.
Yeah.
How's the week been for you?
I'm having a hectic time. But when is this podcast going to come out?
Probably in like a month or two. So we've got some time.
We'll be able to look back on this as why I'm having hectic time.
All right, fantastic. Great. You don't have to say anything more. I'm not going to get you to divulge anything more. But I actually want to start with maybe one of your spicier takes, which is, kind of near and dear to my heart, all about measurement. And, you've said something like there's a lot of like bad measurement software, and there's a lot of time and effort wasted in this, pursuit of perfect attribution. Let's start there. Like, why do you think that is the case? Like, why do people still struggle with this concept of trying to like perfectly triangulate everything?
Yeah, I think it comes from a lack of understanding of marketing in the art of marketing sense. I think there's like probably for the better a generation of CMOs and marketing leaders now that have come through the performance background rather than the brand background, and probably have grown up in like what I would call like the arbitrage era of marketing, where you could pump money into Meta and get returns pretty much endlessly. And so that would be the way that people would operate. I think the reality, and like, I think a really simple thing to understand, is that the purchase journeys are complicated. And so different channels, different pieces of content will do different jobs at different times for different people. And any system that says or attempts to say, hey, this piece of content did this much impact, I think is going to end up with a false sense of precision, just because the world is messy. And I think any attempt to go past that without honoring the fact that it's going to be complicated and unlikely to be accurate will lead you to a place where I actually just think it leads you too low in the funnel. I think you end up in a situation where you over credit channels that are better at telling you that they are driving conversions, whether or not they actually are.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit, because you also reference performance and brand. I personally, this podcast is called Brandformance, so it's inspired by
I hate the term
those two
brandformance
words.
as well, by the way.
There we go.
It's like it creates like that they're two different concepts that have been melded together. I'm just like, it's one thing. Like, it's just one thing.
Totally, and I'm 100% aligned with you. That choice of word was very sort of intentional, because I personally hate the dichotomy between these two. Like there isn't one, right? Like the thing that we call brand is like usually, it's all of these things that we can't measure well, so we're going to put this in this bucket called brand. And then performance is like stuff we can like it's completely not true. But when you talk about this internally with your marketing team, what is the language that you use to talk about this sort of? Some people use the funnel, some people use, awareness, consideration, or, the IDA framework. Like, what is the vocabulary that you all like to use?
Yeah, I think where I like to start with this stuff is every piece of content should have a goal. And that goal should be to move someone from a state to another state. And so where are you trying to move someone from and to? And how will you know that they have moved? And so you might be moving somebody from completely unaware of your brand to aware of your brand, and there'll be some measurements that you put around that. There'll be some, I think like one of the ones that's underrated is like skeptical to trusting. Like, how do you do that, and what's the measurement around that? And or from aware but not for me to kind of more likely to buy. And I think like actually having fixed labels for a funnel or states, I think is actually a bit limiting. I think like you probably want to be pretty flexible to what you're trying to achieve because you'll need to achieve different things at different times. And so, I mean, the way this plays out for me is like we exist in a category where perception of the product changes a lot because it's in the news a lot. So, you know, like we largely do weight medication and services around that. And so the state of our audience is changing all the time. And so if you had fixed funnel metrics or goals, I think you would end up in a pretty limited space. And so I like to think about things as like, what state are we trying to move people to from and to? But does that actually play out in our teams very well? Like, not really, because like you're still governed, you know, by metrics at the end of the day. And so what I'd like and what I see are probably two different things, but it's always a battle, you know.
And you are in a unique position as a CEO who understands marketing, who grew up in marketing. You
Mm,
can still sort of dictate that conversation top down and adjust in your week to week, conversations with marketing, like, hey, don't over index on that because this is where we need to be. And I think that most leaders don't have that nuanced level of understanding of marketing and kind of
mm,
miss the mark. That's at least my personal take. Okay, on that note, you mentioned that what you would like and what your the marketing organization at large is able to do might be slightly sort of different. What is your cadence with your team, and what are the types of metrics that you hold your team accountable to? Are you able to get into that
yeah,
without
for sure.
divulging
I like.
too
I
much?
mean,
Yeah.
I'm very involved with my team. I like. Look, you pointed out like a relatively unique part of our business is that like I'm a marketer, and so I don't have the typical like I guess like CFO. I always see these like stupid conversations on LinkedIn about like how you convince your CFO that your marketing is actually doing anything, and I'm like, that has never happened to me. And so I'm like willfully ignorant on how to handle that situation, but I lean in pretty hard. I think there's like a trap that always exists, which is like venture backed companies are chasing short term growth in metrics. Those short term growth metrics, like whether they are revenue growth or whether they are cohorts or whatever they are, they always drag you lower in the funnel and into more discounting and into more margin compression. And so I think a big part of my job is giving teams the license to swing, building systems for measurement around those bigger swings, and then kind of encouraging diversity of ideas and kind of bets and scale of bets and those type of things to actually meaningfully move the brand forward rather than be dragged down into your typical conversations of like a high funnel metric, a low funnel metric, an LTV to CAC, all those type of things that we see as pervasive across ecom Twitter.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about a real example, which obviously I'm sure you've heard about this. One of your teams kind of took a pretty big swing recently, where you cut spend on a pretty big channel. I'm not going to go into any of the
Mm,
details, and we're currently like smack in the middle of analyzing that period of time, and that was a pretty drastic shift, right? In
mm,
the middle of peak period, you cut a whole bunch of spend on a certain channel. Was that a sort of conscious, like, how do those decisions get made? Talk me about the anatomy of that
yeah,
decision. Is that
that
like
one's
something a channel
yeah.
manager can do, or you're, guiding them on? How does it
I
work?
would definitely be. I mean, I definitely was involved in that decision. I think that one was kind of like more of a portfolio allocation problem rather than a measurement problem in a specific sense. I think like not enough like one of the big traps of D2C brands is like when you run out of places to deploy efficiently. And so one of the big features of our business is we have lots of places to deploy. And you obviously know this, Bernard, but it's like we have markets. And so we'll treat different markets differently and look for the like most efficient source of incremental growth across markets. And the example that you're speaking to was like a market that was like running a bit hot. We didn't need the incremental growth. We were kind of like it was the least efficient place to deploy across the portfolio, and so it felt like an opportunity to shift some capital around, but then also learn some things. And so I'm not going to walk past those opportunities when I get them.
That's amazing. And is that something that you decide? Do you let your GMs decide? Do you let a channel manager decide? Like, how? Because this is,
It kind of
you're in
bubbles up
multiple
to me.
markets.
Channel
Yeah.
managers, channel managers definitely don't decide at that level of decision, but at the allocator level above that, like modern performance leaders, they tend to have to be primarily allocators, right? So it's I think like the main job is measurement in reality, and so I will trust my allocation leaders to have thoughts on that, and then I will move capital between markets based on what I think the biggest opportunities are or what we need to be doing. And there's always like an art to that as well because there's a narrative element to markets as well as there is like a pure return on invested capital element. So I think you're like kind of balancing a couple of things, but you're always doing that.
You're also a big believer in taking big, bold bets when it comes to
Mm,
the actual creative, and I would argue the bigger part of marketing, which is understanding the audience, understanding the jobs to be done, coming up with the ideas, staying on top of sort of culture. How do you incentivize your team to, and you talk about this concept of like moving at the speed of culture, like
Mm.
what does that entail, and how do you sort of set up the incentive structures and the organization to really be able to do that?
Yeah, it's still an unsolved problem for me because we still run into this trap of we tried to come up with like a system for creative measurement that was less, I guess, like simpler and allowed basically like the idea that you needed to produce a certain amount of winning creative over the course of a month, and there were different increments that you could do that with. You could do it with a whole lot of lower funnel creative, or a big swing at the top of funnel, and depending on how far they move the needle, then you could kind of sum the bits to a good month. The problem that ended up leading to was that you could create, like, because of the kind of growth in the category, you could create essentially like huge amounts of incremental return from a meta attribution perspective purely by running a like low funnel discounted message at scale. And so like what I intended as the system was to encourage a mix of big swings and small bets, ended up just being distorted by the fact that small bets placed at enough volume could end up looking like big swings. And so I'm kind of back thinking about how to achieve that. There's like a
Mm,
team structuring challenge to it as well, because do you want your Facebook statics being made by the same team as your YouTube 90-second ads, and how do you balance that? And like it's not an easy problem to solve. And so I don't have a great answer, but I think like the problem is real, which is like how do you ensure
yeah.
that teams are incentivized to take big bets, and then that you're building the measurement systems around those big bets to show that like on a long enough timeline, these are the actual way you move the brand forward.
This is something that a lot of brands struggle with, which is this idea of how do you, really think about creative diversity. And, there's a lot of talk about this in both X and LinkedIn and everywhere, that you need more creative diversity. And it's not about diversity and like the change the copy and change the colors, but like true,
Mm,
differences that are going to appeal to different types of
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And what I have found is it takes a certain type of person who understands the nuances of the channel and the
Mm,
audience in that channel, and is able to sort of come up with those concepts. But it's a very different type of persona than, like I wouldn't be a good person for TikTok because I just don't hang out on TikTok. You can give me all the budget and I will probably waste it if I were the channel manager on TikTok. Do you agree with that take, or do you feel like this is something you can learn,
I think
and
you
even as an
like
outsider?
I disagree with the take. And I think the reason that I disagree with the take is kind of I don't think the person that you're talking about is the same person that is the channel executor. And so I think the skill set that you're talking about is like what narrative is moving the needle for what group of people at what time. And I think that is like the most important job. And ironically, like the people that post about e-commerce on X are tend to be the people that are least well suited to doing that job, because like they're the ultimate sheep and system runners. And so I think you have like this old school creative that kind of has a feel for people and a feel for kind of storytelling that I think is really, really, really important. And then actually the channel based execution of that, you can then have like the terminally online Gen Z kid running the TikTok thing, and that's fine. But without that layer above person who has to have empathy for the channel, because like the worst thing in the world is when you have like a stuffy former creative agency leader who is going like, actually TV is still the pinnacle of creative work, and therefore I'm going to focus on the TV ad. So it's like, yeah, like the thought experiment that I'm interested in the moment is like, what do you end up paying a great creative leader? And like,
Mm.
like the thing that's been interesting to me out of the like machine learning kind of AI talent kind of wars is it's like I think ecom probably has a similar thing where it's like a great creative leader is probably worth 100 times the median creative strategist, and therefore like how do we think about that problem? And yeah, I don't know is the answer.
I mean, you raise such a good point because that used to be the case, right? In the Mad Men era, like those people used to make bank, and somehow the last couple of decades, that sort of economic value just disappeared, and then people
Because they
thought
tried to
that you can
hold on
just,
to the Mad Men era. That's
yeah,
why.
sure, 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 sure. But to be fair,
Hubris.
to be fair to them, I don't know. Have you read this book called Scientific Advertising? Is that name familiar to you?
Who's it by?
Okay, this guy called Claude Hopkins. I think it's like
Oh
the
no, I haven't read it.
1920s or something. All right. And this guy's like a no name, nothing, right? He works at a farm, but then he goes to like a town and starts doing some advertising work. And he comes at it with like very first principles approach. And so he wrote the book in the 20s or 30s called Scientific Advertising and talks about all the experiments he ran to drive more foot traffic into stores. So we think about the Mad Men era as like, the actual show Mad Men, but like
Mm.
when you read about it, there are people who are doing lots of interesting
Very
things,
DR stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well,
very
advertising was
DR
a bit more
stuff.
DR and it's yeah.
Yeah. But on that note, right, you also talk about this fact that you're not a big fan of sort of large agencies, and you think that the world is moving towards sort of more specialized, maybe in-house, maybe like smaller agencies. Like, and I see that in the data. I think there was like 14% layoffs predicted in the agency market like this year.
Mm.
What is going to be the way that the brands of the future do all of that creative work? Is it all in-house? Is it AI? Like, what's
I'm
your
like
take?
I'm definitely like AI end-to-end creative. Like I really, really don't like, I think I've said this, but I don't like how Mark Zuckerberg talks about creative because it's like if you raise the floor, it will all look the same and there'll be no alpha. And if there's no alpha, then no one will like people will spend less money in the channel. And so I think but like Mark Zuckerberg has never understood ads and he understands ads even less now than he ever has before. And so it's like a really interesting problem for Meta, even though obviously they are like a
Their stock price is
incredible.
through the roof over the last,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
3 or
but
4
have you
years.
noticed I don't know if you're like I'm a big Ben Thompson fan, and he's been talking a lot about how, like, Instagram is under monetized, but have you noticed that Instagram has started doing that thing that they first ruined Facebook with, which was, like, notification stuffing,
Oh, yeah,
which which
totally.
me is the like, that drives up monetization obviously because it drives up, kind of engagement, but it also drives up the annoyance, the unmeasured annoyance metric, which I think will eventually be a real problem, but it's obviously not a problem now, and I think they're trying to, like, bet that they can AI infra their way to the other side. But yeah, anyway, that's my take there. I don't even know what I was originally talking about. Oh, where
We
who
were
does
talking
who
about.
does the work? Who does the work? I think look, when I try and strip this back to what I think is the base unit here, I'm like, where are great storytellers now located? And I think ultimately they're making their own work in many, many different ways, in many, many different forms. And so they might be a comedian, they might be a TikToker, they might be a journalist, like they might have a Substack. Um, but great ideas with a strong production system. So I think brands have to have a really strong production system. I don't think you can outsource production. I think it's really, really important that you do yourself because you have to produce so much volume in the machine. It has to be like a manufacturing cost advantage. But then where the ideas come from and where the executions of those ideas come from, I think the net has to get wider and wider and paying one group of people under the banner of a mid-tier agency in the hope that they have great storytellers, I think just kind of ignores where the economic incentive for good storytellers has gone.
Yeah. And I believe you, and I like what you're saying here, which is essentially go find the best creators online who are creating anyway, and they have, organic reach, or, they have some way of sort of testing their creative, and you're leveraging that talent, you're amplifying it through paid, so on and so forth. The one thing that I struggle with, and tell me if you agree or disagree, there's a lot of busy work in marketing.
Mhm.
I think about, we are a much smaller company. We're a B2B company, nowhere near your scale, right? We started advertising 6 months ago on LinkedIn, and don't hate me for this, but LinkedIn works for us.
No,
All our customers are there.
I don't I like LinkedIn as an advertising channel. I hate LinkedIn as a consumer platform.
There we go. The hardest thing about these channels is when you're just starting, and if you're only spending 5K, 10K, 20K, 50K a month, there's a certain amount of limit to what you can even test, right? You put
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
hundred different ads in there, and like you're just gonna get zero statistically valid signal on what's
Mhm.
working and what's not working. It's just like all averaged out. So when you were starting Eucalyptus and all the different brands, how did you approach that like 0 to 1 stage of figuring
Mm.
out what's working, what's not working when your budgets are tighter? And I know I'm asking you to go back in time and think about this.
Well, I mean, I was protected a little bit by the CPMs on Facebook being $10, and so you could put a picture of my own head on there, and it probably would have done fine. But okay, I kind of like have two kind of conflicting things here that I'm thinking about. The first is the best creative outperforms the median by 100x, and so therefore, if you run 100 tests and none of them work, you probably just haven't produced any great creative, and that's expected because you're obviously figuring out the channel. So I wouldn't be deterred by that. But if you shrink the test unit small enough because you don't have the creative capacity in house, you're just going to make less exciting, more shit stuff. And so I think like it still comes back to that question of like distribution of like, and I mean distribution along an axis, not distribution in the context of like getting to the audience. I just think you probably
I
have to
see.
work harder for more distribution, probably less bets across more things, and then kind of be governed by the principle that if it works, it's really going to work. So that's probably how I would think about it.
One of the things that works really well for us on LinkedIn is this concept of a thought leadership ad. Think of this as, I write on LinkedIn every day, and whatever hits, we put, dollars behind it and we amplify it.
Yeah,
It seems very logical, seems very sort of rational. Do you all do that type of stuff on the consumer side in
yeah,
your sort of
definitely.
organic content? Okay,
No, no, the organic content. No, 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 no. We just do small budget paid stuff and then scale the things that work.
got it. All right, very cool. I'm going to ask you about your biggest success in the last like 4 or 5 years. What has been the most interesting or large, win that you've had in the marketing space?
I think all of our wins have basically been the same, which is finding a new channel or format in a new channel that has worked really well. And so, like, I think being the first to price or find mispricing at scale in a channel. So some examples of that is like we were very early to long form YouTube ads because we realized that they were priced on the 15-second view or whatever it was at the time, 6-second view.
Yeah.
We were pretty early to like the memification of outdoor and then the ability to use outdoor online. Like I think like the playbook became the whatever it
Oh
is,
my God.
playbook.
Yes.
Like we did that in like 2013 or 14 or whatever it was. And then other things were like we were the first in our category to really get on TV at scale. So that was, a big deal. We're the first big at scale advertiser on Grindr. And that worked really well. And then
I
and
didn't
then there
even
are the
know
creative
Grindr
bets as well,
had
right? Where it's like,
advertising.
can you speak to a older audience on a typically young channel? So can you build content for older people on TikTok? Like I think like there are real returns for being willing to traverse new space and kind of like and like the obviously canonical examples of that are like being the first to stories and being the first to reels and this type of thing. But and I think that's why people are frothing the potential of ChatGPT ads and stuff, just 'cause they know that pattern, and so they know that there'll be arbs there. Although it seems to have been priced in a really silly way, so maybe the arbs aren't there. But you want to believe that there'll be arbs all the time. I just don't know if OpenAI know what the they're doing with ads, so it's probably not going to work. But maybe one day.
Okay. So you take all these creative bets. Do you set aside a certain amount of budget in a year when you think about these bets, or do you take a very agile approach that, hey, we think there's an opportunity here, we're going to go and like unlock this thing? Or do you have a portfolio approach where like, hey, no, I'm going to set aside 10% of the annual budget to go try crazy shit?
So we don't really do budgets, and so
All right.
I guess like it's a portfolio approach. What we're looking for is opportunities I mean, like we're reacting to what's happening in the market and then kind of thinking about the type of sometimes we're like super boring for a period of 6 months because like we know that UGC is working in a new market and like we just have to stay disciplined. Like discipline is as important as kind of creativity sometimes. And at other times we're like, okay, well, we can see the end of this thing as a source of differentiation. And so we need to put our head up and try some new things. And so it really does depend on where markets are at and kind of where brands are at.
I mean, those are some bold words. You don't have budgets, and I'm going to bring in your CFO. And I know you've mentioned your CFO is awesome, and so I got to talk to him someday. How
Mm.
does that work between so the marketing function and the finance function? How are they doing or there are budgets that's just not how you run the marketing team?
So we would operate to a payback target. I guess like more single purchase oriented businesses. I know some of the Twitter kind of like think boys talk about like marketing efficiency ratios goals. I think like we basically run to that type of model and then basically allow people to deploy up until they think that's no longer they no longer hit that, and then they can then come and ask for more budget if they need to, or I guess like more money really if they need to push for a bigger campaign or they think there's a reason to extend paybacks, and then we'll manage that across the portfolio. And so we have a rough idea of how much we're going to spend on marketing each month, but it moves millions of dollars. Sometimes we'll underspend by $5 million, sometimes we'll overspend by three, and over the course of a quarter or over the course of 6 months, we'll hopefully be we always are back to kind of a rough view of what we expect to happen.
Gotcha. You've also, pivoting a little bit back to sort of the short term and the long term. You've talked about this idea of long term bets, and Is that something you think about, or is it always about like, hey, what's happening in month and quarter? Or like, is there a time horizon that's a 12-month or a 24-month bet from a marketing lens that you have to invest in early?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think like I think about that more in the context of like capacity and capabilities. Like if you're going to we're building editorial teams at the moment in kind of a couple of our key markets.
What
I
is an
expect them
editorial
to be.
team?
I guess like I think about it as like the research journey. So like everything from ad through to transaction. All the touch points that aren't ad touch points, owning those and kind of being relevant in those and kind of creating trust and all the other things you want on that journey, but just really creating like a place for that ownership. I think the other thing is like the distributed content that is not paid content obviously has a different flavor to it. So you kind of need to be specific about how you staff to that. And so I don't expect that to be yielding for the next year, but I expect it to kind of create long-term assets that can yield over time, whether that's like a YouTube channel or a magazine or whatever. You know, like Stripe's a really good example of this with like the Stripe Press stuff. And obviously have unlimited capital to do it, but like at some level you have to build long-term content assets that can last, and they obviously take investment and time.
When you think about making those types of investments, obviously you're not judging them on, ROAS or some type of payback. Do you feel like it has to be you as the ultimate capital allocator to make that decision, or do you also, kind of delegate that in the business a little bit?
I think GMs will do a good job of, in most cases, of thinking about where that needs to go. Like coming up with like what it is and how to think about the bet is probably, a bit of a combination of people. But I think like, they're looking like the classic example is like we'll have a look at where a market needs to be at the end of the year. And then we'll look at like where those conversions are likely going to have to come from. And then do we actually believe that those conversions are actually going to come through the core channels? And if the answer is no, then they're going to have to come from somewhere else. And so we're going to have to build something. And then that conversation kind of starts, and then we build to a point where we're making big long term bets.
All right. One very tactical question. Are you a memo person or a deck person?
Uh, I
What's the
prefer to
culture like?
write. I prefer to write, but I also prefer to consume decks probably. I like the hard thing about like having a written culture is like writing well is difficult, and so passing a whole lot of written content can be really difficult. Whereas like obviously like decks create a lot more margin of error for communication style, and so you can move through things pretty quickly. Screenshots are pretty powerful, So
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really, I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
really have like a strong horse in that race, but certainly for my own thinking, I prefer to write.
All right, cool. One other question for you before we get into our final round here. You've said something like this is the best era for creatives. Why do you think that is? What is possible now that was not possible before?
Oh, I think the first thing is like the arbitrage era is largely over, and so the arbitrage era like depowered creative massively because it just wasn't that important. It wasn't it wasn't the right place to spend money, and now that's kind of over. It's all priced in, mostly priced in, and so you have this need for net new stories, and then the places you can deploy net new stories is like more varied than it's ever been. And then the scale of those stories is bigger than it's ever been. You can, it's not unreasonable. Like a Super Bowl ad would be the only time a year where you could reach 100 million people ever. You know, 15 years ago, and that's pretty doable. With a well-made YouTube asset now, or a big TikTok piece of content. So I think there's that, and then I think the cost of production is now so low that like no idea is impossible. I think like I still think most of the AI slop is like kind of bad, and you don't see very many good ads out of it. But I mean like the proof of concept for a big bold idea is now so easy that like winning organizational support for something like that should be easier than it's ever been. And so I think like the combination of cost of production, scale of distribution, importance of the work, I think those things are now combining to this point where it's like if you are a ideas person in the classic sense, then the value of your time and the value of your work has never been higher.
I couldn't agree more. I think about sort of creative as the biggest thing that's going to drive the function forward. Like I love all my measurement stuff, but like creative is where the money's at. Okay, last two questions before we wrap. Tim, what is a brand that you are jealous of right now?
Oh, I think like I've been looking at a lot of. I actually don't know how to say. Is it Gruns or Gruns or whatever it is? I don't know how
Gruns,
to say.
yeah, Gruns. I think they
Yeah.
say
So
Gruns. Yeah.
the thing that I really love about the way they're operating is their landing pages are so precise. Like it's just like execution at a deliberate delivery level that is just like so good. So good. Because I found like I always used to find AG1 to be pretty sloppy, like in its
Mm.
marketing and in its delivery. Like people used to froth it, but I was like, like the creative's pretty shit. It's pretty one dimensional. The landing pages are boring as and so then to see that come and get eaten alive by a more precise kind of technical operation, I mean that's right up my alley.
All right. Okay. And then the last one. If there was I mean, I feel like this is you're gonna have an easy answer to this question. If there was any experiment that you could run without any constraints, right? A dream experiment, what would that be?
I think the places where I'm most interested in experiments is like actually on conversion. I think the ecom let's keep it to ecom because my conversion funnel is pretty complicated. But
Sure.
like the ecom conversion funnel has like been boiled down to like essentially the Shopify template manifested scale. And I'm like, I just struggle to believe that like that is the best storytelling mechanism for somebody to buy. Like I think like this like agentic commerce kind of thing that people are talking about, which I don't think is going to really exist in the way that people think about it, but just like the way that you get convinced of something in an interactive way and then you transact. Like I think the cart should be abstracted away and be very simple. But how you move from like this product is interesting to me through to I'm going to transact, I'm just like super
Mm.
interested in terms of like where that goes and what's possible. And so I'd love to see like drastically different versions of that journey be tested in kind of at scale. And I think I'm really interested in is there a conversational interface that handles most of that journey? And so you actually get, do you remember you've probably seen these businesses because like they're mostly bullshit. You know, the ones that claim to like personalize the landing page based on like who's coming in and like
Yep.
all they do is slow down your website and end up like breaking everything. Um,
Sure.
but that promise is obviously like super cool. So I'm like, I
Mm.
think there's a world in which we get something like that, but probably more conversational. And I'm like really excited about what that could possibly be. But what it looks like, I don't know. So I'd love to see that experiment. I think like the other experiments that I just, I'm just so skeptical of Meta. Um,
Mm.
like I just think it's bullshit. Like I just, so- okay, okay. What I'm
Like
really
Meta
sketched on.
as a, yeah. Like tell me about which part of Meta are you skeptical
Well,
of?
so okay, so you have like a video ad, and you have an average watch time on these video ads of like 2 seconds. Maybe that's the industry average,
Yep.
somewhere between
Yep.
2 and 3 seconds. And yet they're claiming like hundreds of incremental conversions for that bloody ad. And I'm like, how? Like, how is that
Mm.
possible? So I reckon there is a case, and I'm a like big meta bull and I love meta. But I reckon they've like okay. Here is my conspiracy theory that
All right.
like Zuck is so obsessed with funding the AI stuff and the metaverse stuff that like the entire ad platform has like kind of crossed the Rubicon and is now just so good at getting between you and the conversion, the customer and the conversion, that it just like claims so many conversions that it doesn't deserve. And so what I would love to see is like much more bold turning off of Meta to see, or much more of a return to like very segmented targeting. So being like, okay, you have to absolutely go blue ocean on Meta and only find incremental new audiences and neg out everyone else. And like real restriction of their ability to get into the deep into the transaction flow. I just think the targeting's gotten so good that incrementality is just very, very hard to believe. And also they're so good at marking their own homework that like I just like
Yeah.
I'm sus on them. And obviously like well, it would still be 60% of our spend or more, at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm not like throwing the baby out with the bathwater and being like the actual true number is 0. But I just think the true number is not 60. And I just
Yeah.
go down to the video watch time. Like, who's being convinced of something in a 2-second video? It's just impossible to me. And then you've got YouTube at the other end of the spectrum, like average in the teen seconds, sometimes in the 20s. And you're like sound on environment, 20-second view time, no conversions. And you're like, that's hard to believe. That's just very hard to believe.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I look at some of those stats of the video view rate, and it baffles me as well. So I can appreciate the skepticism. All right, Tim, this has been fantastic. Always a pleasure to have you and chat with you about all things. Do you write online? I see you commenting
No, I'm
online and
banned from
memeing
writing online.
online.
I'm banned from writing.
There we go. All right.
No, no, no,
Well,
no. I
go
used to.
follow. You used to?
Don't
Okay.
follow me anywhere. Don't follow me anywhere. Just buy stuff from Eucalyptus and that'll be fine.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me on this, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again in a few months,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. I'll have
find
a
out
series
what
of
what what
series
all
of
the
new dumb
excitement
takes
was.
to kind of share with you all.
No, not at all.
Thanks, mate. Chat to you soon.
All right, folks, that was Tim Doyle, the CEO of Eucalyptus. I was cracking up throughout many parts of that interview. He is an absolute delight and a true marketing savant. Go give him a follow, even though he doesn't want you to follow him. And check out Eucalyptus's products. And if you're in Australia or the UK or Japan or Germany, check out some of their products. Tune in again next week for another great episode of Brand Formance.